I only asked him for help because I trusted him. Because I thought, after everything we've been through, he'd care enough to say yes. My roof was leaking. Not a disaster, not yet. But I could hear the water creeping in above my bedroom ceiling, one drip at a time, like a clock counting down. I didn't want a gift. I didn't want pity. I just needed a little loan to patch things up before the next storm rolled through. That's all. He didn't even pause. He leaned back, let out a tired breath like I was a stranger asking for too much, and said, "I'm not wasting money unless you're dying." I didn't cry, not in front of him. I nodded, told him it was fine, told him I'd figure it out. But I didn't sleep that night. I just laid there listening, to the ticking in my chest, to the slow drip in the corner of my ceiling, and to the part of me that finally stopped waiting to be loved like I used to be. Thank you for sitting here with me, for listening. I don't take that lightly. Sometimes the hardest part isn't what happens to us. It's wondering if anyone out there would even care to hear it. So before I go on, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? I wonder what your sky looks like today. I wonder if you've ever sat in a quiet house like mine, listening to the sound of something breaking overhead while someone you love pretends not to hear it. And if any part of this story starts to sound familiar to you, I hope you know you're not alone. If you've ever carried the weight of silence because speaking up only made you feel smaller, I understand. If you've ever offered your heart and been handed back a shrug, I know that ache. I'm not telling this story to shame anyone, and I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm telling it because I think some truths need a witness. Maybe you have one too. You can leave your story in the comments if you want to, or just sit here with me, quiet and present. Either way, you're welcome to stay. I've been alone for a long time, but I didn't always feel lonely. After his father passed, I had every reason to fall apart. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was a boy looking up at me with eyes too wide for his years, needing someone to make the world feel safe again. So I rolled up my sleeves, tied my apron a little tighter, and gave him everything I had. Not just the food on the table or the roof over our heads, but the warmth in my voice, the time I didn't have, the strength I wasn't sure was still in me. I gave him a home, even when the house felt too quiet for my own comfort. There were nights I didn't eat dinner so he could have a second helping. I used to buy shoes one size too big for him, hoping they'd last a little longer. Birthdays were never flashy, but he always had a wrapped gift and a candle to blow out, even if it meant I was paying bills late. I still remember the way he'd run to the window to wait for me when I got off my second shift. I'd be so tired I could barely stand, but the second he smiled, it was like all the weight fell off my shoulders. And when he got older, I worked extra hours and took side jobs so I could start setting a little money aside. I called it the someday jar. Someday he'd go to college. Someday he'd have his own place. Someday he'd look back and see what I tried to do. I never wanted praise. I just wanted to be the reason he never had to beg for a chance. Every time I dropped coins into that jar, I imagined him walking across a graduation stage in a cap and gown, knowing he made it because someone believed in him enough to plant seeds they'd never see bloom. He used to be such a tender boy, always checking on me, bringing me little drawings, helping me fold towels even when he didn't do it right. He had this way of laughing, loud and unbothered, like he trusted the world completely. But as the years passed and he found success, something shifted. He got busier. His voice changed. It became clipped, like every word had to be efficient and sharp. He started dressing in tailored suits that looked expensive and cold. His hugs grew shorter. His eyes wandered when I spoke, like I was background noise he had learned to tune out. I used to tell myself it was just age, that all grown men drift a little, that it was normal. But when someone you've loved since the day they opened their eyes begins to treat you like an afterthought, it doesn't feel normal. It feels like being erased, little by little. And the worst part? You start questioning if maybe you were never really seen at all. It had been raining on and off for days, the kind of slow, heavy rain that sits in the sky like it's got nowhere else to go. I didn't think much of it at first. I've lived in that house for over 30 years, and we've weathered every kind of storm together. But this time, something felt different. That morning, I walked into the kitchen and found a small puddle just beneath the window. I grabbed a cloth, thinking maybe I'd left it cracked open. But when I looked up, I saw it, a slow, steady drip from the ceiling, right above the kitchen table. Not rushing, not loud, just that soft, shameful tap of water finding its way through years of tired shingles and worn-down beams. I stood there for a long moment, dish towel in hand, not moving, just listening. I think there's something especially cruel about water when it chooses to remind you that you've waited too long. It wasn't dangerous, not yet, but it was humiliating. That leak didn't just fall on my table, it fell on my pride. It fell on all the work I'd done to keep things together. And for the first time in years, I felt helpless. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly who I'd have to ask. I sat down, stared at my phone for a while, then finally called him. My hands were cold and a little shaky, not from age but from everything riding on that one phone call. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want him to hear the need in my voice, but I did it anyway. Because even after everything, part of me still believed he might care enough to show up for me, just this once. He answered on the second ring. Sounded distracted. Said he was in between meetings. I swallowed hard and said, "The roof's leaking. I just need a little help. Nothing big. Maybe a small loan, just until next month. I'll pay you back." There was silence. Then I heard him sigh. Long and deep, like I had interrupted something important. And then he let out this little laugh, almost like he couldn't believe I'd even asked. He said, "I'm not wasting money unless you're dying." I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the wall in front of me, listening to the rain pick up outside, listening to the way my heart sank in real time. I told him it was fine, that I understood, and I thanked him anyway. My voice didn't crack, I made sure of that. But the silence after we hung up was louder than anything he could have said. His words didn't just land and disappear, they stayed. They repeated themselves in my mind like an old song you never meant to memorize, but somehow know by heart. I must have heard them 100 times that evening, without him saying a single thing more. "I'm not wasting money unless you're dying." It played while I folded the dish towel. It played while I boiled water for tea I never drank. It played when I turned off the lights and sat on the edge of my bed, trying to pretend like that moment hadn't just rearranged something inside me. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him of the nights I walked to work in the rain so he could have the car. I didn't list the sacrifices, the late bills I paid with the last 20 in my purse just to keep his lunch money coming, or the way I never once asked for anything back, not even a thank you. I just said, "All right," and thanked him softly, like the kind of thanks you give someone who's held the door open for you out of habit, not care. After I hung up, I stood by the kitchen sink for a long time. There was a new spot on the ceiling, darker than before. The towels I had laid out were already soaked through. I went to the linen closet and pulled out 2 more, placing them gently on the floor like I was laying down blankets for some invisible guest. Then I sat back down and watched the rain. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just listened to the rhythm of the drops, the occasional creak of the beams, and the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from something breaking inside you and no one noticing. That night I lay in bed not under warmth or comfort, but beneath a roof I wasn't sure would make it through the week. I could hear the dripping still, softer now, but steady. I could feel the cold seeping in from the walls, and even more from the quiet in my phone that wouldn't ring again. And as I stared up into the dark, my heart didn't feel angry. It felt abandoned, like I was a burden someone had been waiting to let go of. Towels were catching the rain above me, but the silence was catching me, holding me down with its heavy arms. I turned on my side, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and whispered into the empty room. He really said that. And I knew, in that still hour between midnight and regret, that something had changed. Not in him, but in me. Because once you hear those words, once someone makes it clear that your well-being is only worth attention if you're one breath from gone, you stop waiting for them to see you again. You stop asking, you stop hoping, and you start making quiet decisions in the dark. The next morning came with no mercy. The rain had stopped, but the house still smelled damp, like soaked wood and tired walls. I put the kettle on, though I wasn't hungry for anything, not even tea. I stood by the window watching the gray sky fade into something a little lighter and told myself I'd figure something out. I always had. Maybe there was a neighbor who knew someone. Maybe the city had a program. I didn't know yet. But what I did know was that I was done asking him. That door had closed, quiet as a sigh. I sat down at the kitchen table, still damp from the night before, and opened my laptop, just something to distract myself. A few emails, some news articles. Then I made the mistake of clicking into Facebook, like I often did when the house felt too still. I wasn't looking for him. I was just passing time. But time has a way of delivering answers before we even know the questions. There it was. A photo. Bright, full of color. The kind of image that almost hums with music and ocean breeze. He'd been tagged by someone. I think it was one of his coworkers. I froze the moment I saw it. My hand didn't move from the trackpad. I leaned in, slowly, not because I couldn't see, but because I couldn't believe. There he was. Smiling wide, cocktail glass raised, a woman curled under his arm. Palm trees behind them, the shimmer of turquoise water, a beach so clean it looked painted. He was wearing sunglasses, the kind with mirrored lenses. I could see the reflection of the waves in them. And he was laughing, not a soft, polite smile. A full-body laugh, the kind he used to save for me when I made his favorite soup, or told him the same old story for the 50th time. I blinked once. Twice. I looked at the caption. Weekend escape with my love, grateful for peace, no stress, just freedom. Freedom. That was the word he chose. I stared at that word longer than I stared at the photo. Because all I could think about was the way I had asked him for help, just a few bills to stop the rain from falling on my head, and he told me he couldn't help unless I was dying. But here he was, living without a care. Drinking, laughing, lounging in a place that cost more per night than my groceries for a month. And not once did it seem like his mind wandered back to the woman who gave him every ounce of comfort she never had for herself. I looked at that photo until it blurred. Not from tears, but from something deeper. Something tired. It was like looking at a stranger who used to live in your home. Someone you once knew like the back of your hand, now so unfamiliar that even their smile feels like a betrayal. I closed the laptop slowly, like sealing a wound I hadn't meant to open. My fingers stayed still on the lid for a long while. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. But I knew something had snapped in me quietly. He wasn't broke. He wasn't stretched thin. He just didn't think I was worth the cost. He could spend money on palm trees and poolside drinks, on spa days and luxury, but not on the roof that kept me dry. And that wasn't about finances. That was about value. About how much space I still took up in his heart. Or how little. I sat back in my chair, the same one I'd had since he was in middle school, the one he used to drag out to do his homework next to me while I cooked. I folded my hands in my lap, and I said nothing. Because there are some truths too sharp for words. Some betrayals that don't need screaming, they just need a quiet, final decision. And that morning, as the sun finally cut through the clouds and touched the cracked ceiling above me, I made one. Later that same day, I found myself wandering through the house, not looking for anything in particular, just touching things that used to mean more than they do now. I opened the linen closet, then closed it. I checked the spice rack for no reason. Eventually, I ended up in the bedroom, standing in front of the old wooden dresser I hadn't opened properly in years. One of the drawers stuck a little on the right side, the track worn down from decades of use. I pulled it gently and it groaned, like it was protesting being disturbed. Inside were envelopes, some curled from age, some with yellowing edges, all stuffed in beside receipts and photographs too faded to make out clearly anymore. I wasn't looking for anything, but my hand settled on a small, folded piece of paper wrapped in a rubber band. The handwriting on the outside made me stop. I knew that script. My breath caught as I slid the band off, unfolded the paper carefully, and saw his name at the bottom. It was from my husband. I must have tucked it away years ago and forgotten. Or maybe I hadn't forgotten. Maybe I just buried it in the busyness of surviving. The ink had faded a little, but the words were still strong. I read them aloud under my breath, like I was speaking with someone long gone but not quite silent. He'd written, "If you ever feel forgotten, just remember, you gave your all. That's never wasted." I read that line twice, 3 times. I could hear his voice in it, steady and warm, the kind of voice that held you up even when everything else was crumbling. I sat down on the edge of the bed, letter resting in my lap, and closed my eyes. I didn't need advice. I didn't need a solution. I just needed that reminder that even if the world around me shifted and pulled away, even if the sun I raised saw me as less than useful, even if the roof above me betrayed its purpose, there was still something in me that mattered. There was still a life behind me, built on sacrifice, love, and good intentions. That letter didn't patch the roof. It didn't change the photo I saw that morning. But it did something I hadn't realized I needed. It quieted the voice inside me that had started whispering, maybe I deserve to be forgotten. Because when someone you raised forgets the weight you carried for them, you start to question your worth without even noticing. But that one line, tucked away for decades, reminded me that worth isn't measured by who shows up when you ask. Sometimes it's measured by how deeply you've loved, even when no one's watching. I pressed the letter to my chest, sat there for a while with the late afternoon sun stretching across the floor, and allowed myself to feel something softer than anger. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But clarity. The kind that settles in your bones and lets you know it's time to move. Not to run, not to hide, but to move with intention. And that maybe, just maybe, the next step I'd take wouldn't be about what I lost, but about what I was finally ready to let go. The next morning was quiet, not just outside, but inside me. That kind of quiet that doesn't feel hollow anymore, but certain. I sat at the kitchen table again, the same table where the ceiling still held a soft stain from the rain, and I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. Something in me had finally gone still. Not out of exhaustion, but out of decision. There was no more asking, no more waiting, no more hoping he might change his mind, come around, remember who I was to him. No, I was done clinging to that. I reached for my checkbook, the old blue one with the edges fraying a little, the one I used to balance when every penny mattered. I turned to a fresh page and started writing. Not numbers yet, just thoughts. What I had, what I needed, what I could do if I finally stopped pretending this house was a home anymore. Then I pulled out the manila envelope where I kept all my important papers, birth certificates, titles, deeds. I laid everything out on the table in front of me, each page a reminder of how much life had passed through my hands, how much I had held alone. And then, without ceremony or drama, I picked up the phone and called a realtor. A kind-sounding woman answered. I told her I was ready to list the house. She asked if I had somewhere else to go, and I said I would figure it out. She offered to stop by that week. I said fine. Next, I called the shelter downtown. The one I used to donate canned goods to every December when I still had a little left over after bills. I asked to speak with someone in charge. A woman answered, her voice warm but surprised. I told her I had something I wanted to give, not leftovers, not expired food, but something real. I didn't tell her how much yet. I just asked if they ever needed help with housing, with repairs, with mothers trying to get back on their feet. She said yes. Always yes. I told her I'd be in touch. After that, I called my lawyer. It took a few rings. I asked to update my will. Told him I wanted to change the names on the papers, redirect everything. He asked if I was sure, if something had happened. I said something did happen, but not all at once. It happened in inches, in silence, in being looked through one too many times. I'm not angry. I'm just clear now. By the time I hung up, it was afternoon. The sun had pushed its way out from behind the clouds. I could hear birds again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of my decisions sitting with me, not on me. I wasn't writing to him. Not a message, not a warning, not a goodbye. I wasn't trying to prove a point. I was just choosing. Choosing to give what I had left to someone who might see it, who might need it, who wouldn't laugh at the sound of my voice or roll their eyes at the thought of my name. I looked around that house one more time. The worn corners, the familiar smells, the shadows that had kept me company for decades. I loved that house once. I kept it alive longer than anyone expected me to. But now, it was time to stop patching something that no longer felt like mine. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just picked up the pen and moved forward. Quietly, fully, and without looking back. The house sold faster than I thought it would. One open showing, a handful of calls, and an offer came in from a young couple just starting out. The kind of couple that holds hands during walkthroughs and whispers dreams into the walls. I watched them from the porch as they stepped through the same doorway I had crossed, with arms full of groceries and worries and bedtime stories, year after year. I didn't feel sadness when I handed over the keys. I felt release. Like I had finally exhaled something I'd been holding inside for too long. When the check cleared and the funds hit my account, I sat with the number for a while. I thought about all the things I could have done with it. A small condo maybe, a new roof on a different home, comfort, safety, even silence if I wanted it. But none of those things felt like healing to me. They felt like avoiding, and I had done enough of that. So I made another call. This time to the shelter director, the same kind woman who had taken my first call weeks earlier. Her voice was steady but warmer this time, like she remembered who I was before I even said my name. I told her I was coming in, not to drop off a check in the mail, but to hand it over in person. She told me there was no pressure. I said, "There is no pressure when you're giving something freely with no strings." I put on my best coat that morning, the one I used to wear to church on cold Sundays. I walked into that shelter with a quiet kind of pride. No announcements, no cameras, just me and an envelope and a decision I knew in my bones was the right one. She met me in the front lobby. The walls were covered in soft paint colors, bulletin boards filled with handwritten notes and drawings from the little ones who called that place home for now. She took one look at the envelope, then at my face, and she didn't ask a single question. She just hugged me. Arms wrapped around me like I was someone who had been seen, not judged, someone who mattered. I didn't cry, I didn't speak right away. I just let myself be held for a moment. And then she stepped back, looked me in the eyes and said, "You have no idea what this will do for them." I looked at her and replied, "I think I do." Because I've been the woman holding things together with threadbare towels and borrowed time. I've been the one standing in the quiet of her kitchen, afraid to ask, afraid to need, afraid to be told I was too much or not enough. And I've also been the one who gave, again and again, even when no one asked her to. Especially when no one asked her to. So this choice wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about being forgotten. It was about remembering who I used to be, before the hurt made me quiet. It was about giving help, real help, to someone who might be holding it together on a hope and a whisper. The kind of help I once gave without hesitation. The kind I asked for and didn't get. The kind I now had the power to give again, fully, without asking for anything back. She walked me through the shelter after that. Showed me the rooms, the shared kitchens, the baskets of donated clothing. I watched a young woman rock her baby to sleep on a worn couch, her eyes tired but soft. I nodded, not at her, but at the life I could now touch without needing to be in the photo. We stood in the main room for a while. She said she'd put my name on the donation wall. I asked her not to. I told her the names that matter are the ones still learning to say I'm safe out loud. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled back. Not because anything had been fixed, but because something had finally been set free. Me. He came back the following week. The airport must have been busy because I didn't hear from him right away. I wasn't expecting a call, not after how we left things. But something told me the news would reach him soon enough. And it did. 2 days after I handed over the keys and walked out of that house for the last time, I got a knock at the door. Not a phone call, not a text, just a knock. He was standing there on the front step of the small rental I'd moved into, looking confused, a little out of breath, like he'd hurried over without fully knowing what to say. I opened the door slowly. He didn't even greet me. He just blurted out, "Mom, why is there a sold sign on your lawn?" I looked at him for a moment, not with coldness but with clarity. I stepped aside, gently waved him in. He followed, eyes darting around like he couldn't quite believe where he was. It was smaller than the old place. One story, no garden, just a cozy little corner that held exactly what I needed and nothing more. No memories in the walls, no leaking roof, just clean open space. I went into the kitchen and set the kettle on. He stood there in the doorway, still holding his phone, like he expected someone to call and tell him this was all some mistake. I didn't rush, I didn't ask him to sit. I just moved like I always did, measured, steady, present. When the water boiled, I poured 2 cups of tea, slid one across the table, and finally looked up at him. "You asked why there's a sold sign," I said, my voice soft but firm. "It's because I sold the house." His face tightened. He didn't understand. Or maybe he did, and just didn't want to believe it. "You didn't even tell me," he said. "You didn't even ask." I nodded slowly, stirred a little honey into my cup, then placed the spoon down. "No," I said, "I didn't ask. Because the last time I did, you said you wouldn't waste your money on me unless I was dying." He flinched, just slightly. Not enough to apologize. Just enough to know those words still echoed. I leaned back in my chair, sipped the tea, and let the silence stretch. Then I looked him square in the eyes and said, "You were right, by the way. I wasn't dying. I was finally living." He didn't know what to say to that. His mouth opened, then closed again. The anger in his face was starting to wilt into something else. Confusion maybe, or disbelief, or the realization that the mother he'd grown used to ignoring had done something permanent. Something he couldn't walk back. "You could have at least told me," he said, quieter now. "It was my childhood home." I smiled just a little, not out of spite, but out of the truth I had finally made peace with. "Yes," I said, "it was your childhood home. But I was the one who kept it standing, and I got tired of keeping a place that only remembered me when it was convenient." He sat down across from me then, tea untouched, eyes searching mine like he was hoping to find the version of me he could reason with. But I was gone. The version of me that asked, waited, hoped. She had packed up with the boxes and walked out of that house for good. "What did you do with the money?" he asked. I looked at him, calmly, steadily. "I gave it to someone who needed help and didn't have to be dying to deserve it." He blinked, stunned. I didn't explain further. I didn't owe him a breakdown of dollars and cents. I had given him every ounce of me for decades. This time, I had given what I had left to something that made sense. We sat there for a long time in the quiet. His tea cooled, untouched. Mine warmed my hands. And in that silence, I saw it. He wasn't angry because he thought I'd done something wrong. He was angry because I did it without needing him. Because for the first time, the story didn't end with him saying no and me waiting anyway. That chapter had closed, and I didn't need to say it out loud for him to know. He could see it in the way I held my cup steady, in the calm that had settled in my voice, in the peace I had found in the simple choice to live on my own terms. After he left, I sat for a while in the same chair, listening to the quiet settle back into the room. Not the heavy kind, not the aching kind, but the kind that lets you breathe without waiting for the next wound. A few days later, I finished unpacking the last of my boxes. The senior cottage was smaller, yes, but it was warm, bright, even. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor every morning like it had somewhere to be. The windows opened without sticking, the taps didn't drip, and the roof, well, the roof held steady, even when the wind picked up. There was a little garden just beyond the back door. Tomatoes, some herbs, nothing fancy, but enough to remind me that things still grow when they're tended to. A few neighbors would stop and chat on their way to the mailboxes. No one asked too much. No one pried. It was a quiet kind of belonging, and I was grateful for it. Every Thursday, a young woman from the shelter comes by. Her name is Naomi, and she brings me updates about the mothers who've moved into the new units, tells me how the kids are adjusting, shares photos of the painted walls and bedtime routines that are slowly becoming their new normal. She calls me Miss M, like it's a name filled with respect and affection, and not just habit. I make her tea, she tells me stories, sometimes we laugh, sometimes we just sit. And you know, it's funny how strangers become family when family becomes strangers. The love I used to hand out like breath now lives in unexpected places. And somehow it still finds its way back to me, just in a different form. One that doesn't ask me to beg for it or earn it or shrink for it. Just one that arrives warm and whole and stays. They ask me sometimes what happened between me and my son. Not always directly. Sometimes it's just in the way people tilt their heads when his name doesn't come up, or how they glance at the empty seat beside me during holidays, waiting to see if I'll mention anything at all. I never offer much. Not because I'm hiding it, but because I've already lived it, and retelling it doesn't heal it. It just reopens the room where it happened. But when I do speak, I say this. I asked for help, and he asked if I was dying. Now I'm living. And I left him with that question. And I have. I've truly left it with him. I don't carry it anymore. Not in my hands, not in my voice, not even in the corners of my heart where I used to tuck old regrets like folded letters I couldn't throw away. I've learned something in these quieter years, something I wish I'd known sooner. Being done isn't the same as giving up. It's not bitterness, it's not rage, it's not some dramatic ending with slammed doors and raised voices. No, being done is gentler than that. It's waking up one morning and choosing peace instead of permission. Choosing to step away from places where you are only ever welcome when you're quiet, useful, or convenient. There is a quiet kind of power in knowing when to stop pouring from your cup, especially when no one remembers how long you've been holding it out, arms shaking, just hoping someone would notice it was nearly empty. I don't need to explain myself anymore. Not to him. Not to anyone. The roof over my head doesn't leak now, not because someone fixed it for me, but because I stopped waiting and started walking. I made choices, bold ones, soft ones, ones that were mine to make, and that's the part no one can take from me. Some people will only ever come knocking when they need something. Others will wait too long, assuming you'll always be there, always available, always forgiving. But there's a kind of silence you earn, not from anger, but from clarity, and I've found mine. I don't wish him harm. I don't sit here praying for him to suffer or realize anything in a flash of guilt. But I do hope he remembers. Not the money, not the house, but the moment he told me I wasn't worth the cost unless I was on my way out. Because that moment didn't kill me. It woke me up. And now when someone asks me how I'm doing, I don't start with hesitation or mask it with a smile. I say I'm doing just fine. I'm safe, I'm warm. I'm seen, and more than anything, I'm free. I'm not the woman waiting by the phone. I'm not the one staring at a stained ceiling hoping someone shows up. I'm the woman who got up, cleaned her hands, and wrote a different ending. One where she mattered to herself first. One where done didn't mean broken. One where done meant finally whole. If someone ever made you feel like asking for help was a burden, like your needs were too heavy or your voice too soft to matter, I hope you'll share your story with me. Being made to feel small in your own moment of need isn't something you should carry alone. And if you've ever stood in the rain, real or not, waiting for someone to show up, only to realize they never would, then know you're not the only one who's felt that kind of cold. You don't have to explain why it hurt. Just leave a comment if this reminded you of something you've carried too long. Or, if you've let it go, say how it felt when you finally did. Subscribe if you've had to rebuild peace with your own hands. If you've taken the long way back to yourself. If you've found strength in the space someone left behind. And if you're still holding your breath, waiting to be seen, let this be your exhale. You are not invisible. Not here. Not anymore. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.